Did Y Combinator just ruin pre-seed and seed funding for the rest of us? We need to talk about this in this video because I was listening to another YouTuber, not even a Y Combinator YouTuber, talking about this issue. And they were talking about what it was taking to raise capital or the expectations for funding in today's startups. What this all boils down to is traction. You heard me talk about traction over and over again. If you've been around startups for even a minute, you understand that traction is something that investors look for. And we're talking about specifically 10% week over week traction. Before we continue, my name is Ed Kang. If we've met before, use the timestamp. I made it easy as possible for you to skip right ahead into the start of the video. If we haven't met, I am a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. That's just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times to your benefit because I use videos like this and this YouTube channel to help early stage founders, especially if you're raising capital, avoid some of the catastrophic mistakes that I've made. Not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try to make your life a little bit easier because it's difficult enough as it is. I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com. If you haven't checked us out yet, go check us out. A lot of free resources there. If you're from Startups.com, thank you so much for your support. Do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe. Your support is always appreciated. I'd love to hear what you think. Let's jump into this argument of whether YC ruined startup funding, early stage funding for the rest of us with this whole conversation about 10% week over week growth. Here's a quote from Gary Tan as the partners at Y Combinator were talking on their podcast about the week over week growth that they've seen recently in their batches. Well, 10% week on week is an amazing metric to hit. And I think back then, if you were maybe the top 1 or 2 companies in the whole batch, you'd be able to achieve that. And since summer of last year, the wildest thing is realizing that both summer and fall batches in aggregate in 12 weeks average 10% per week. That's pretty crazy. Back in the day, when I first interviewed down at Y Combinator, they taught this principle. They said, put a sticky on your laptop and put 10% week over week growth. Just write it down and target it. Now, I happen to be really lucky, and I hit a few weeks of 60% week over week growth, but on average, on other startups that I've done, 10% week over week growth has been darn near impossible in the early stages. But if you did reach 10% week over week growth, you're pretty much guaranteed funding because your growth graph looked amazing. It went up and to the right. And I know founders that when I tell them to try and target 10% week over week growth, they look at me like I'm an alien with like an appendage growing out of my forehead, and they say that's impossible. They sometimes get really mad at me, and they say 10% week over week growth, if you extrapolate that out for the rest of the year, that is a massive, insane amount of growth. But that literally is the level of hyper growth that founders needed to achieve and investors wanted to see. Now, it wasn't reality. If you were hitting 2% growth, 3% growth, you were still doing okay. But it was the entire concept of shoot for the sun and you'll get the moon in between instead of just shooting for the moon and settling for what you get. I know it was something that really helped me push my startup for that traction, and I've used the same concept over and over again. Set that North Star at 10% week over week. So I fully agree with the concept. But saying now, in aggregate, across the 2 batches, over 12 weeks, they're achieving 10% week over week growth. That is pretty insane, and I just want to acknowledge that. The problem that we are hitting right now is we need to ask this question. Will early stage investors now expect 10% week over week traction? Has Y Combinator basically raised the bar, sort of reset the market? You know, in sports, when a quarterback or a franchise player at a certain position gets a new level of money, they say you've reset the market. Now everybody knows that that's the standard in which we're going to be doing business. Well, is this the new benchmark, the level watermark that you need to be hitting as a founder, and is it expected by investors? Well, first, we need to acknowledge that Y Combinator has an agenda here. They want to be telling investors, we've got the best of the best of all the founders in the world apply to Y Combinator, and they get into the batch, and if they can be hitting that level, well, investors are going to go to Y Combinator and say, you've got the pedigree startups, the ones that are in fact doing that 10% week over week growth. So is there a little bit of an agenda, a little bit of PR, maybe some propaganda involved there? Absolutely. They want to brag about it, and more power to them. Let Y Combinator be Y Combinator. But for me, what was interesting was that I was hearing other people outside of Y Combinator talk about it as if it was spreading out like a wave and it became common language. And when it becomes common language and everybody just talks about it, well, investors are going to get ideas. They're going to be expressing that to founders. Founders are going to feel insecure. But then, you know what? Maybe founders do step up. The question goes back to, has this become the new normal? Will investors expect this on a regular basis? And the answer is yes, but not because of Y Combinator, but because of reality. And in this video, we are going to talk about the reality check that I want you to take for yourself if you're a founder, especially the early stages of the new normal. Instead of being a lot like other founders that just complain and say, they made it so hard for me to raise money, and they cry outrage, this is so unfair, we all need to do a reality check, and that's what I'm here to do. That's why you watch these videos, and I want to make sure that we're having a transparent conversation and we're addressing this right on the head. The first factor that we need to take in is that there's a very specific type of AI that's selling a lot, and those are AI agents. AI agents are selling like hotcakes right now because it's a massive pain with low resistance to adoption. Think about it just for a moment. If I could hire an employee that's going to make a lot of mistakes and pay them premium wages, we're talking like $150,000 to $200,000 a year, and suddenly an AI agent can come and do coding, and I don't need as many of those expensive engineers. Well, what do you think I'm going to do as a business, especially right now when there's so much pressure to become hyper efficient with capital? There are rewards out there in the stock market. You watch the stock market on how shareholders are rewarding companies for cutting down expenses. And that's the reason we have this tech session. There's this massive layoff of white collar workers that supposedly were protected from these types of trends. Well, they're not anymore. And so before you cry bloody murder, you want to stop and think about where the money is and where the money goes. They say there's the golden rule. The person who has the gold makes the rules. And the companies are buying these programs and they're buying these AI agents to try and get hyper efficient. And AI has gotten so good these days that there are magic moments that are happening all over the place. Companies are starting to see it. I begin experiencing it. If you look at how much I even use just ChatGPT and how little I use staff, how less of a workforce that we need, we're going to talk about the effect downstream of this in just a moment. The effects are exponential. It's never accelerated so fast because not only are the tools becoming more efficient, they're cheaper. Back in the day when you were a farmer, if you had to go buy a massive tractor to plow a field, when you could have just, used your $20 tool and done it manually by hand, and that's what you were used to, well, there was a leap that occurred that was required. There's resistance that you had to get over to adopt that tool. Now we're talking AI. You can go pay $20 a month and start playing with AI. Of course, there's going to be less resistance to that change. And that is a boon for founders who are solving these painful problems. So keep this in mind as we look at the other factors. We have to examine how these AI tools now can help founders get to product market fit faster. Founders are now accelerated using AI tools. You can build MVPs using these agents. You can go and use ChatGPT for content marketing, for research, all different functions that would require you to actually make money, then pay somebody to do it or do it yourself and spend hours. Well, there's this great equalizer where now one individual can be hyper productive. One person hacking away at their terminal using AI, generative AI, can now outperform 10 people who normally would go slow because of systems, because of the way things are done, because of, fixed mindset, because of rigid processes. Well, now you've got one person that is outperforming 10, and that is the 10x multiplier that AI starts to bring. I myself, for my venture studio, I have never put out MVPs faster. I've never tested things so much faster. Even something simple as publishing a book as an MVP to go out and test and maybe make some revenue. Back in the day, formatting, getting a publisher, getting distribution. I used to use these things called vanity presses. This was when a traditional publisher wouldn't pick up my book, so I'd get another publisher that would pick up my book if I was willing to pay a certain amount of the cost. Well, now with technology, bam, it is literally out there in the market, and I'm getting feedback, which helps me understand how to get to product market fit that much faster. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but they're predicting that literally 3-person companies can build billion-dollar unicorns sooner than later. It's exciting and freaky at the same time. We're either going to be living in Star Trek, where everything's taken care of, we're living off universal basic income, and food gets 3D printed, and we just travel around in spaceships. We don't need money, we don't need to work, and we've got other issues such as exploring the universe. Or it becomes a dystopia like Cyberpunk or Ready Player One, where you've got all the wealthy people up at the top, and then you got the rest of us, I'm going to count me included, sitting here at the bottom, just plugged in, playing video games, and trying to maintain some semblance of feeling human. No matter which way you stand, it is a crazy time, and we have to acknowledge that change is barreling faster than it's ever before. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what's next? Because guess what? Not only are we having major disruptions in certain parts of the market, it's only a matter of time before that happens in other industries. We've seen Gen AI go and take on the creative industry, and a lot of artists are losing their jobs. And I understand it sucks, but what are you going to do? Instead of me going out and paying $500 for an artist to do something that's going to take them a few months, I can go pay my $20 subscription and hack away and come up with like 10 different variants of artwork that I could be using that's just as good. Now, there's a whole other set of implications in terms of who does that belong to? Is it ethical? And all the noise that's happening out there, it's tough to break through. But the reality is AI and Gen AI and what is possible is not going away. And if it has affected creative industries and the movie industry is trying to defend itself and say, we don't want AI in any of our movies, but capitalists and savvy founders are going to try and figure out a way, and consumers are consuming the product. They're okay with AI generated stuff. Well, what do you think is going to happen in other industries? It's happened in coding. It's going to happen in other things like analysis. All those analytics, those people who did data analytics, guess what? They're going to be out of work. Even things like looking at medical scans and all these technical fields, they are going to be disrupted. It's only a matter of time. On top of which, less capital is necessary. We are seeing founders raise less money. They are not raising A rounds. They do not need that capital. But what happens is when you have that vacuum of capital, that capital is still going to be there. It's like matter in science. It cannot be created or destroyed. So that funding has to go somewhere. And I believe it's going to flow into earlier rounds because investors are going to say, guess what? If I don't get in on this early round, they're not going to come to me and ask me for funding at the A round. It's no longer, I'm going to wait and see what you do with this early stage capital, what you do with your pre-seed and seed. Contact me when you need your A round because I know it's a better bet. It's a surer thing at least. But that's going to change because founders are not going to be raising the capital. They're going to say, well, you weren't around for the early stages. I don't need you anymore. We're already making money because we're growing 10% week over week. And that's where there is good news for all of us. Technical barriers are now lower than ever, especially when it comes to building your MVPs. I'm talking to you, the founder out there who doesn't have a technical background, or maybe you're living in another developing country where technology is just being adopted. There's no infrastructure when it comes to the hard stuff, like the hard infrastructure, roads and buildings, but there's massive amounts of infrastructure when it comes to the internet, being online, computing power. That is getting easier and easier. Your cell phones are getting more and more powerful. The barriers of entry are now lower for you to create an MVP. And as I say over and over again, I want to be optimistic and positive. If you're willing to put in the work, every founder has a better than 0% chance of building an MVP, and it's getting better and better with these tools that are available right now. And for you to go be a successful founder, and if you want, go and raise that capital, which is even being challenged right now, because if you can bootstrap and you can reach 10, 12, $20 million in ARR in the first year, why do you need to raise capital? But that brings us to the bad news. The competition is greater than ever. Not only do you have more opportunity than ever, everybody's going to start piling in, and you see this happening right now. So many people are saying, I've created a micro SaaS. I've created a new ChatGPT program, which is just basically a wrapper around an LLM, and they are making millions of dollars. I cannot discredit them. The true reality check that you are facing right now has nothing to do with Y Combinator or AI. It has to do with you looking in the mirror and asking yourself, what am I going to do? What are you, founder, right now watching this video, going to do in the face of all this disruption? It's going to happen regardless of your feelings on it. If it's not Y Combinator talking about 10% week over week growth, it's eventually going to be somebody else. So you might as well embrace it and figure out, hey, what do I need to do to change, to adjust, to adapt, learn and grow to be able to reach those metrics, to be successful as a founder and competitive with other startups and raise funding if that's what you even want. Many times in startups, we have seen things change over and over again that have completely disrupted the way startups are done, evaluated, they're funded, they grow, and they exit. I'm an old man. I've seen this happen over and over again. One of the last times that it happened to this degree was the entire mobile revolution when everything went wireless. Wireless was an inflection point that completely changed it all. And then you saw a lot of companies that were doing stuff on mainframes and servers and boxes having to move to the cloud. I still know companies that are stuck doing things the old way, and they are barely making it on the cloud. And that has pretty much passed for so many other technological advancements. And now AI and automation come around, and wow, are we seeing things start to change? So did Y Combinator ruin early stage funding for the rest of us? You could make an argument, yes, just by the way that they've got the reach, their messages go out, and people pick that up, and investors are going to pay attention. But it's not just Y Combinator. It's an entire industry. It's AI. It's the way things are going. So you want to buckle in. You want to learn and figure out what are you going to do. And that's what we want to explore here. And I look forward to doing that with you. Watch some of the other videos that I put on the screen. We're going to have this ongoing conversation. I would love to know what you're thinking. What are you struggling with? Because I know it's hard, but you signed up for this. All founders, all startup founders struggle because that's part of being a startup founder. And so let's do it together. You are not alone. Thanks for hanging out in this video. I'll see you in the next one.